Welcome to Shor Machshav on the Daf. We're holding a Menachos Daf Ayin. The Gemara in Amud Aleph regarding the discussion, if you have something that was replanted, does it still retain the tevel status as before, and it can be called a truma? Says the Gemara, it cannot be because in ken matzinu truma b'mechuber lakarka. Then you find truma when it's connected to the ground. V'tanan, the Mishna says, Loi matzinu truma b'mechuber lakarka. We never have truma mechuber lakarka when it's connected to the ground. Fascinating thing over here. The Gemara is quoting a Mishna, Rav Yishaya Pick, who wrote in additions to the Mesuris Hashas. So Mesuris Hashas on the side will give us what's the sources of everything in the Gemara. Rav Yishaya Pick added to it. Usually we have it in brackets in Mesuris Hashas, comes from Yishaya Pick. So it says Rav Yishaya Pick, L'koitzer daiti. Lo yadati l'tzayin mekoyma. I don't know where it is, but Mishna or Babraise shemifurish davar zeh. Meaning, I don't know the source that the Gemara is quoting. The Gemara is quoting a Mishnah that we don't have truma mechuber lakarka. I don't know any Mishnah or Braise that says meferish. So in the first year, in the end of the Gemara, the Nemuki Agriv and the Mitzvah Eson, they bring two sources. They actually ask on Yishaya Pick, what do you mean there's no source? Here's the source. So one is the Mishnah Trumas Perek Aleph Mishnah Hey. There the Mishnah says you can't do truma min atolush al mechubar v'lo min mechubar al atolush. You can't do truma with something connected to the ground and something which is not connected, and vice versa. So he explains the Bartanura, because truma is only something which is harama, and harama is only something detached and not connected to the ground. So says the Tosfos Yantiv, according to this, the Mishnah says you can't do from tolush and mechubar and talush, but hu adin mechubar and mechubar, because as long as it's connected to the ground, there's no truma. And it's a little he'ara in the Bartanura, the why, if so, the Mishnah says mechubar tolush mechubar. But al kolpanim, the way that the Rav explains, so it's meaning that there's no truma when it's connected to the ground. But this is not such a great question of Shaya Pick, because Shaya Pick said there's no meferish Mishnah. This Mishnah is clearly not meferish. Adarabah, the mashmos of the Mishnah is not like that. The problem is only when it's tolush al mechubar or mechubar al tolush. Mashma mechubar and mechubar you could do connected to the ground. But there's another Mishnah, Maseches Bikurim, Perek Beis Mishnah Dalet. There it says, Yesh b'Bikurim Hashem b'Truma. There's something in Bikurim that Truma does not have. And what is it? She'am Bikurim niknim b'mechuber lakarka. There's Bikurim when it's connected to the ground. So as someone pointed out, Rav Yishaya Pick himself has a pirush on Mishnayos, which is called Yesh Seder LaMishnah. It's printed on the Mishnayos in the back. So he says over there, he says, what is the explanation that Bikurim Nikim Mechuber Lakarka? Because Bikurim you could do when it's connected to the ground. As we know, the Medrash tells us someone goes down to his field and he sees a new fruit that is budding out from the tree. He ties a ribbon around it and he says this is Bikurim. So clearly it happens when it's connected to the ground. Mashenkin Truma, it's something which you cannot do connected to the ground. And he brings our Gemara. The Gemara says, Lo matzinu truma mechuber lakarka. So he adds in brackets, he says, I pointed out over there that I don't know where is the source of the Mishnah that you cannot have truma mechuber lakarka. Now he doesn't add anything else. So someone wanted to understand what he meant to say is, maybe here is the source. Here's the Mishnah, because the Mishnah tells us that Bikurim you could do when it's connected to the ground, mechuber lakarka. And that is the difference between Bikurim and Truma. So here's a Mishnah that tells you that Truma you cannot do mechuber lakarka. But Rav Yishaya Pick adds one more sentence over there. He says the maskana of our Gemara is legabi misa v'choimish. What does the Gemara tells us? The Gemara says that what we said that there's no Truma b'mechuber lakarka is only regarding if someone eats it, he's not chayav miso, and if he did it b'sheik, he doesn't have to pay choimish. But there is Truma when it's connected to the ground. Now, not so clear Rav Yishaya Pick wants with this line. Could be means that that's what the Mishnah there in Bikurim says. Bikurim, it's full Bikurim. You know, the same halachas that apply to Truma apply to Bikurim regarding someone who eats it. So, Bikurim, when it's connected to the ground, you have Misa v'choimish. And Truma, when it's connected to the ground, you don't have Misa v'choimish. That's what it's possible that Rav Yishaya Pick is trying to say. But Rav Chaim Kanievsky in the Sefer Siach HaSodeh says there's a problem with that, because what is the reason that our Gemara says that Truma you don't have when it's connected to the ground? Because it's not derech achila bekach. If someone will bend down and eat connected to the ground, botlo daitas a kol adam. That's why there's no misa and chaimish. So it's not a din in Truma. It's a din in the way you eat. And if so, this thing should apply to Bikurim as well. The Mishnah there says, Bikurim, you have connected to the ground. Truma not. But if the problem is that's not derech achila, so that will apply to Truma and Bikurim as well. So says Reb Chaim Kanevsky, so clearly we're not referring to that Mishnah there, because that Mishnah is not talking about this issue of Mechuber Lakarka. So I searched and found a few Mefarshim that answer this question of Reb Chaim. What is the Sefer Divrei Pinchas over here? And the Divrei Pinchas tells us like this. You're right. Of course, Bikurim and Mechuber Lakarka doesn't work. But Bikurim has another thing. Bikurim, you're not going to be chayav a miso and choimish unless you bring the fruits to the house. And that's based on the Gemara and Menachos Daf Yud Ches. So what do you have until you bring it to the house? You have Eser. Not miso and choimish, you have Eser. By Bikurim, the Eser is the same if it's connected to the ground or not connected to the ground. Because even if a person eats it shloike derech achilo, he still has Eser. So that's the pshat in the Mishnah there in Bikurim. By Bikurim, there's no difference before it reaches the house between connected or disconnected, attached or detached from the ground. And both of them is only an Isser. Masheik Truma, before it reaches the house, if it's attached, so you don't have Chiyuv Miso. If you detach it, you have Miso even if it didn't reach the house. So that's the difference between Bikurim and Truma and the Mishnah over there. Another answer I saw is brought down the Sefer Yosher V'Toiv. He says a very Gishmaka Einfeld. He says, what does the Gemara tell us? Why Truma I don't have when it's Mechuber? Because if a person is bending down to eat the Truma from the Karka, so it's Lo Derech Achila Bekach. So he says, but Bikurim, many Bikurim grow on the trees. So if they grow on trees, I don't have to bend down. I just got to go to the tree and eat connected to the tree. So in Meir, that's what the Mishnah there in Bikurim says. By Bikurim, there is Bikurim also when it's connected, if it's Derech Achila Bekach, meaning if you don't have to bend down. But by Truma, you're not chayav in Truma until you don't do Miricha, which you don't finish it up. And that is shaykh only by Tvua. Meaning, the case that we have in our Gemara. Someone has the Tvua, he made a pile out of it, and then he replanted it. By fruits, it's not shaykh. A person went, made a pile out of fruits, he then planted the fruits? No, then he planted the seeds. So I don't have over here Miricha. So that's what the Mishnah is telling us, that Bikurim you can have Mechuber Lakarka and Truma not, and according to these two explanations, so maybe the Mishnah and Bikurim will be the source to our Gemara, and maybe that's why Rav Yishaya Pick is saying in that brackets over there in the Sefer, he said in the Mishnah, I mentioned that I don't know where it is, but maybe it is this Mishnah. Just a fascinating discussion to find a source of a Mishnah. Anyone who wants to join and sponsor the Shomachshava Shiurim, please email shomachshava@gmail.com.